When you think about whether you should get the vaccine or you shouldn't, as we mentioned, that's a very personal choice. But I think if one thinks only of themselves, that can be a selfish choice. We need to be thinking about not only of me, but my community. How does my decision, whatever I personally choose to make, impact elderly parents? How does it impact my son, my daughter, my aunts, my uncles? How does it impact the larger community? So the Christian ethic calls us to be considerate to the larger community based on Jesus' principle, love your neighbor as yourself. If one thinks only of themselves, that can be a selfish choice.
All right, guys, welcome back. We're going to talk about the church appears to fall but does not. We want to examine some quotes in their context. We want to consider this in light of the current situation that's taking place, especially with regards to the sorcery and pharmakia, as mentioned in Revelation chapter 18:23. By thy sorceries were all denominations deceived. And that's what we see going on in all these denominations, these churches today. They've definitely accepted and been deceived by these things. And as it says in Revelation chapter 12, verse 9, it is the old serpent that deceives the whole world. And he uses pharmakia. That was one way in which he used to deceive the whole world. And many people don't realize that these things have come to pass right now, and they're missing the current events and misunderstanding many of them. In regards to the pharmakia, we are told by Mark Howard that the General Conference has taken a neutral position in regards to this issue.
My wife worked at the Great Lakes Seventh-day Adventist Academy as the food service director, and I was working in the Sabbath School and Personal Ministries department as the associate. Neither of us were pressured by the conference to receive the vaccinated. Nobody knows who's who because it wasn't asked, it wasn't required. There was no pressure on that. Our office in Michigan, our conference office, maintained a neutral position.
Now, is it true that they maintained a neutral position in regard to the pharmakia, or have they taken a stance that said, actually, we think that you should be doing these things, and they pushed it? And not only did they push it, but they also made a lot of financial money in regards to this. There was no neutral position about this. They were very adamant in regards to whether or not you should get it. This is actually from Andrews University, the update on steps to lift COVID-19 protocols. And they said the state of Michigan, which is the Michigan Conference, as well as our campus, has a goal of 70% of adults fully pharmakia'd before those changes can be made. Clearly, they did not take a neutral position in it. They wanted people to get this, and they were pushing it. Some of them will say, no, we didn't promote it at all. We didn't push it. We didn't ask anybody to do it. And of course, you know, some of you have heard this before.
But Adventists individually have freedom of conscience. And this is true for so many things. For example, we have been at the General Conference accused recently for promoting vaccine. We have not promoted that.
Yeah, again, same thing as Mark Howard said. We took a neutral position. We didn't promote it. We didn't push it. Meanwhile, we know that they did. We can read their documents and also go to many, many video statements and statements that they made in regards to this, that they wanted their people to get the pharmakia. And they pushed these things. They said those who are not fully pharmakia should plan to practice physical distancing, wear masks in large gatherings when indoors, and you had to take tests if you were not getting these things, and they wanted to make it very hard for those who did not go along with it. They also said, please make a report of these things to Andrews University. They said if you didn't go along with it, they said you wouldn't be allowed to travel, you'd have to get testing, and they said other implications that will be influenced by those who have chosen not to receive the pharmakia would be used against them to make sure that they did. And of course, they told you if you didn't receive these things that you didn't love your neighbor as yourself. Kentucky-Tennessee Conference was going to push the Biden mandate. The Biden mandate, of course, was going to force all within any organization to be fully pharmakia'd, and if they didn't, they were to be fired. They were to be let go. They were not to have jobs anymore. Even Advent Health was going along with this pharmakia. They wanted to mandate it even though Florida government was opposing it. And they're supposed to be the ones that are pushing the health message and understanding the health message for this time. They were going along with the sorceries of Babylon. They were pushing these things on to the people, and not a lot of people discerned and understood where this was going. Some did, such as one person named Conrad Vine, who was speaking out and saying we should redirect our money and maybe put it in a different direction so that it would go to people who actually respected liberty of conscience And it was not very welcome by the church, of course. The church did not like that because, of course, it was hurting their pocketbooks, and it still is, probably to this day, in a great way. So anyways, they banned him from speaking in the Michigan pulpits, and that was the next step. And some people say it was just about him preaching false doctrine and the idea that the church would not make it through.
More, okay? This is not a supportive ministry. Furthermore, I've had some people say, well, he wasn't talking about now, he was talking about if and when thus and so happened down in the future, that it might have to be, there might have to come a time when there would need to be a drawing away into this parish church movement. What some folks are failing to understand is that those who have studied this in the Bible and the Spirit of Prophecy, who understand our church's official position on this, know that such a time is never going to come.
In regards to the position that Conrad Vine was taking, they said that was error and that Conrad Vine should be suspended from being able to speak in a pulpit because this, in apostasy, the point where people might have to separate, he said that time was never going to come. Mark Finley kind of echoes these statements.
A boat in the days of Noah, a boat that would take them through to the end, a ship that would take them through the storm. God has a church today to take his people through the storm.
And of course, this is what they call the Seventh-day Adventist General Conference organization. They say outside of the General Conference organization, the church cannot exist. So therefore, this is the church that's going through, is the organization. However, I think that they may be misunderstanding a few things, and I think even they might be contradicting their own selves. Let's just examine this in a little more of the context, considering what Mark Howard has told us, and also considering what Ellen White even said in regards to the church. She said, God has a church. It is not the great cathedral, neither is it the national establishment, neither is it the various denominations. It is the people who love God and keep his commandments, where 2 or 3 are gathered together in his name. There am I in the midst of them, Matthew 18:20, where Christ is even among the humble few. This is Christ's church. For the presence of the high and holy one who inhabiteth eternity can alone constitute a church. Clearly, she understood with respect to the church that it was not the national establishment, nor was it the organization, nor was it the General Conference organization. And sometimes there was a necessity to separate from the General Conference. Even in this time here, when she was alive, she wrote this. She said, there will have to be a second conversion in the hearts of some of our leading medical fraternity. Do you think there might be a problem with regards to the leading medical fraternity of the day? Maybe they've accepted the pharmacia of Babylon. Maybe history is repeating itself. And she said, and a cutting away from the men who are trying to guide the medical ship into the harbor, else they themselves will never reach the haven of rest. Christ calls, come out from among them and be separate. Sometimes there needs to be a discernment between the genuine and the profane. And I believe that sometimes people think they're on the right ship when perhaps the ship that they're heading on is heading into a shipwreck.
The article goes on to say basically that the World Seventh-day Adventist Church pitched their tent towards Big Pharma. So the implication is that the church compromised during the COVID pandemic for whatever reason. There are a number of reasons that are conjectured.
Of course, if you understand what conjecture means, it basically means implied by error. And it's something that they're saying that it's not true, that they didn't pitch their tents towards Big Pharma, even though they took millions of dollars from those companies. In regards to the leadership, they all pushed the Big Pharma. Not only that, but many of them took the Big Pharma and actually went along with it. If you remember, it was called the science of the day, and we were to follow the science, kind of like a religion of some sort. Ellen White also said, those who have rendered supreme homage to science falsely so called, which is pharmacia, will not be leaders then. Those who have trusted to intellect, genius, or talent will not then stand at the head of rank and file. They did not keep pace with the light. Those who have proved themselves unfaithful will not be then entrusted with the flock. In the last solemn work, few great men will be engaged. They are self-sufficient, independent of God, and he cannot use them. Many a star that we have admired for its brilliancy will then go out in darkness. Many of them we didn't hear speaking many things in regards to what was happening at that time. They didn't stand up for the light and understand the light, that there was pharmakia and sorcery being pushed onto the people. Instead, they pushed the sorceries of Babylon onto the people, and many went up to Babylon and took her cup and drank the potion. As it says again in Revelation 18:23, by sorceries were all nations deceived. And the word there is the Greek pharmakia, or Big Pharma. So who's really teaching error in this matter? I think it's the leadership of the General Conference, the Michigan Conference, those who are forcing Conrad Vine out of the pulpit. Consider what Conrad Vine has to say with regards to the church and the organization. Let's listen.
The Church of God is not a building, it's not a legal corporation, it's not a 501c3 under the IRS code, but the Church of God are the commandment-keeping, covenant-faithful disciples of Jesus Christ who gather for worship, the study of the Word, for prayer, to ministry one among another, and to share their faith with others.
So again, it's kind of like Ellen White said, the church is not the national establishment, it's not the denomination, it's not the 501c3 organization, it's the people who love God and keep his commandments. Where 2 or 3 are gathered, this is God's church. Let's just consider some of these leaders, because they actually speak against themselves in regards to this matter.
Now, here's a fundamental question. Is there apostasy in the church, or is the church in apostasy? There's a big difference between those two things. Obviously, there's apostasy in the church. The wheat and tares are going to grow together till the harvest. But if you say the church is in apostasy, then you are akin to saying that the church is Babylon and you invite people to leave it.
Well, the church is most certainly in apostasy, and we should not be afraid to say it's in apostasy. We should actually say it. And Ellen White said it in her day. The seventh commandment was being broken. She said regarding what was happening, she said we are in danger of becoming a sister to fallen Babylon, of allowing our churches to become corrupted and filled with every foul spirit, a cage of every unclean and hateful bird. And will we be clear unless we make decided movements to cure the existing evil? And have they cured the existing evil? Seventh-day Adventist kinship tells us that there are over tens of thousands of LGBT that are baptized members into the church right now. The seventh commandment is broken. And I think it's far more broken than it was in her day. So are we in more danger of becoming a sister to fallen Babylon? Have we become a sister to fallen Babylon? Is it possible that there might be a call because we are a cage of unclean, hateful birds to come out? Do you send your kids to haunted houses? I don't think your father would send you to a haunted house if he knew it was a cage full of demons either. She furthermore says, in the balances of the sanctuary, the Seventh-day Adventist church is to be weighed. She will be judged by the privileges and advantages that she has had. If her spiritual experience does not correspond to the advantages that Christ, at infinite cost, has bestowed on her, if her blessings conferred have not qualified her to do the work entrusted to her, on her will be pronounced the sentence found wanting. By the light bestowed, the opportunities given, she will be judged. Now, with respect to the light, as we read in an earlier quote, the ministers have not kept pace with the light. The light of the bride and the bridegroom doesn't seem to be shining anymore inside of her. In fact, she has not kept pace with the light, and it says she will be judged as found wanting. Found wanting means she will be lost. That is referring to the General Conference of Seventh-day Adventists and those who are at the helm of the leadership. But what does the leadership try to tell us?
Ellen White adds this powerful statement, and you'll find it in Letter 55, 1886. You can also find it in the Second Selected Messages, page 380. The church may appear as about to fall. The church may what? Appear as what? About to fall. But it does not fall. Can anything be plainer than that? It remains, while the sinners in Zion will be sifted out. Wait. The sinners in Zion at end time will be what? Sifted out. So where are they up until that time? They're in Zion. The sinners in Zion will be sifted out. The chaff separated from the precious wheat.
When you read your Bible carefully, you'll understand that Zion is the church of the firstborn, which are written in heaven. This is God's church. Now, the church appears to fall, but does not. Consider the following from Conrad Vine.
The church, when we talk about the church, we often mean the legal hierarchy, like the North New England Conference, and the Atlantic Union, the North American Division, the General Conference. When we talk about the church as members, that's often what we mean. But the truth of the matter is, if the government of Maine were to cancel the registration, the legal registration of the Northern New England Conference, does that mean the Adventist Church would cease to exist in Maine? Yes or no?
That's a really good question. We need to ask Mark Finley that question. Is he referring to the church as the General Conference organization? And if that General Conference organization ceases to exist, does that mean the church ceases to exist? Organization is a tool that the church can use to further the work. And if that organization goes rogue, sometimes the church will go on without the organization. And that's happened many times. So in that sense, the church may appear to fall, but the church does not, but the organization is gone. Consider the words of Mark Howard as he contradicts himself from sentence to sentence.
What some folks are failing to understand is that those who have studied this in the Bible and the Spirit of prophecy, who understand our church's official position on this, know that such a time is never going to come. The church is never going to reach that point of apostasy. Now listen, sure, it's likely, it's probable that the time is going to come when we won't have an organization anymore because of legal or economic reasons.
Let's just stop it right there. Consider this. There won't be an organization because of legal or financial reasons. In other words, there's a possibility that the organization will not make it through. And he just said it himself. So therefore, in the time of trouble, when the church appears to fall but does not, there is potential that that organization won't exist when that happens. But then he contradicts himself. Listen.
It's probable that the time is going to come when we won't have an organization anymore because of legal or economic reasons, but it won't be because of apostasy reasons. The church is not going to become so corrupt that there's going to be another movement needed. One of the clearest statements on this, I'm going to share it from Second Selected Messages, page 380. There are other places that this is referenced as well, is this one. You're probably well aware of this. It says, the church may appear as about to fall, but it does not fall. It remains. While sinners in Zion will be sifted out, the chaff separated from the precious wheat. This is a terrible ordeal, but nevertheless, it must take place. Now, the church does not fall. Some of you watching say, oh, no. You're not reading that right. When she says church, she's not talking about the Seventh-day Adventist organization or denomination. She's talking about those faithful believers, the invisible church sometimes we call it, those faithful believers everywhere. That's the church that's not going to fall. Let me ask you a question. If that's what she's talking about, who's needing to be sifted out? In the statement, she says that the sinners in Zion, the chaff in that church, will need to be sifted out. If that church is the faithful believers, by very definition, there is no chaff in that church. That's the true believers. There's no chaff there. This could only be referring to the organization.
Sometimes there are apostates among the church, but the church is always the faithful believers, according to the Spirit of prophecy and according to the Bible. There are people that come in that are not converted, and I understand that. They profess to be the church, and that's all they can do is profess to be the church. They're not the true church. But consider the beginning of his statement. He said the organization is not going to make it through. And then at the end of his statement, he says it could only be the organization. And if you have to watch that again, notice he says the General Conference organization is going to go through. And he has a problem with people who are saying that's not referring to the organization when the church appears to fall, but does not fall. But it's not referring to the organization. If the organization were eliminated because of financial reasons, and it didn't make it through to the time of trouble, in the time of trouble, the organization isn't there, but the church appears to fall, but does not, and the organization doesn't exist, how can you say that the statement refers to the organization? It's impossible. The statement does not refer to the organization. If you go to your Bibles and you look at Hebrews chapter 12, verse 22 and 23, it says, you are come unto Mount Zion, and unto the city of the living God, the heavenly Jerusalem, and to an innumerable company of angels, to the general assembly and church of the firstborn, which are written in heaven, and to God, the judge of all, and to the spirits of just men made perfect. Clearly, the church consists of the spirits of just men made perfect. That is ultimately what the church consists of. And consider this from Acts of the Apostles, page 11. From the beginning, faithful souls have constituted the church on earth. It's always been the faithful souls. I can understand some people are saying, well, no, she said that there's going to be apostates and tares in the church. Yes, they're going to be among the church, but the church is only the true and faithful souls. And it is only God who adds to the church daily such as should be saved. Those who are lost are not the church. They were never the church. So the sinners in Zion being sifted out is referring to a separation that's going to take place during that time. And it has to do with, of course, the faithful souls, and those being separated would be the unfaithful souls who were only professing to be the church and may have had their names written on earthly church books, but their names were never written in heaven, which is where the true church books are. And I can tell you right now that in regards to the church books on earth, many people who have pushed things are still going to be on the church books. The General Conference church books could never be right in regards to who was written in heaven. Ellen White did say there was sometimes a necessity for reorganization. When the church goes apostate, sometimes there needs to be some changes at the head of the work. And sometimes even the organization can go rogue and you need to reform everything from the foundation of the building to the top of the building. She said this, she said that these men should stand in the sacred place to be as the voice of God to the people, as we once believed the General Conference to be. This is past. What we want is a reorganization. We want to begin at the foundation and to build upon a different principle. Sometimes the General Conference can go completely rogue. And this happened in her day, to the point where she said a reorganization was necessary. And sometimes you need to discard some of the organization and the leadership that seems to be leading the church in the wrong direction. If you're not understanding the signs of the times, if you can't see that the General Conference has gone rogue, you're not seeing and understanding the truth for this time. Consider this. This is Dr. O regarding the statement on the church appears to fall but does not. He says this statement isn't hard to interpret, contrary to what some might say. He says the church may appear as about to fall, but it does not fall. It remains, while the sinners in Zion will be sifted out. He says down below, present truth independent SDAs definitely don't present themselves as having tares within their groups. So this quotation must refer to the SDA church denomination, which we all know has tares in it. This is too clear to misinterpret, and I thank God that one day in the future, his church will be purified from all apostasy. So he is talking about the church denomination, and he clarifies this in this one statement where a brother says, to be honest, E.G. White was talking about the organized church, the SDA denomination. And he says in response to this man, exactly. Is it the organization that this quote is referring to? Again, though I think I've already been clear on this, I want to go into this a little further. Is it really the organization that this quote is referring to? I actually asked Dr. O this question, and he said this. He said, my definition of the GC is broader than organizational leaders at some building in Maryland. When the national Sunday law crisis comes, there will be no need for organization because we will not be able to buy or sell, which includes organizational function as churches worldwide. I asked him if the organization was going to go through, and he said when we get to the national Sunday law crisis in the time of trouble, there will be no need of organization. In other words, the organization isn't going through to the end, even though he said that the church or organization appears to fall but does not. That's a contradiction. Again, very similar to Mark Howard. They're saying that to stay in the church means to be staying in the General Conference organization, but yet they're telling us, as leaders of the General Conference organization, that the organization will not make it through the time of trouble. It will not make it through the national Sunday law. So therefore, when the church appears to fall but does not, and that organization structure is gone, it has nothing to do with the quote, the church appears to fall but does not. It's just as Conrad Vine was saying, the General Conference organization, though it ceases to exist, the church continues to exist. And that's what we need to understand, is therefore that the General Conference is not the church itself. It's very plain and simple for anybody to understand. However, many people are still confused because their leadership that leads them is confused. As it says in Isaiah 9:16, as many as are led by them, these ones are destroyed. They think they're on the ship that's going through the harbor, but the reality is they might be in a cage of unclean and hateful birds, since this denomination, as Ellen White said, it didn't walk in the light. And if it didn't walk in the light, it would become a cage of demons. And so what's inside of it right now, I believe, is very dangerous and possibly not telling us the truth about everything with respect to what is really happening right now. See, Ellen White said this would happen right at the time of the loud cry and the time of trouble. She said just before we enter into that period where probation closes, she said, I saw that God has honest children among the nominal Adventists. That means they profess to be Adventists and are not. And the fallen churches. And before the plague shall be poured out, ministers and people will be called out from these churches and will gladly receive the truth. Satan knows this, and before the loud cry of the third angel is given, he raises an excitement in these religious bodies that those who have rejected the truth may think that God is with them. He hopes to deceive the honest and lead them to think that God is still working for the churches, but the light will shine, and all who are honest will leave the fallen churches and take their stand with the remnant. And just who is the remnant? The remnant are those who come out of the nominal Adventist churches. The remnant of her seed which keep the commandments of God and have the testimony of Jesus Christ. Revelation chapter 12:17. And the only way that you become the remnant of her seed is through the process of birth, being born again. Church of the firstborn, which are written in heaven, you must be born of the Holy Spirit. You're not part of the remnant church just because you got a letter saying, I'm a Seventh-day Adventist from your general conference leaders. That does not make you part of the remnant church. You must have the Spirit inside of here to become the seed of the woman. That is the only way in which you will be the remnant church. And so don't be deceived in thinking that you're part of the remnant church just because you're in a general conference structure or a denominational structure. You might be deceived. You might be lied to by some of your leadership who are deceived as well, since they can't distinguish whether the organization is going through the time of trouble or not. I want to consider the following from Conrad Vine, and I want you just to see what side you fall on and what side the general conference falls on in every statement that he makes here. Just consider, please.
Many of them are Adventists by convenience rather than by conviction. The Adventists on the left are independent of federal funding. The Adventists on the right, particularly our institutions, are completely dependent on federal funding for their institutions to remain alive. The Adventists on the left, the faithful and convicted Adventists, they uphold liberty of conscience. The cultural or institutional Adventists feel free to trample on liberty of conscience whenever financially or socially expedient. The Adventists on the left, the faithful and convicted Adventists, will one day establish, when the mark of the beast is imposed, an underground network of lay-led house churches. That's what we're going to be before Jesus comes again. The Adventists on the right, the institutional Adventists, will remain in a visible network of conference-affiliated churches and conference-owned buildings. The Adventists on the left, the faithful Adventists, will be able to preach and live the everlasting gospel and Bible truth freely because they have no fear of loss of having their church taken away from them by the conference or the government. The institutional Adventists, they increasingly self-censor the preaching of Bible truths if they happen to rebuke cultural Marxism.
Now I want you to consider the rest of what he has to say, and I want you to just think as you look at this chart, which side do you fall on? And what side does the General Conference organization fall on? What side do the leadership in the General Conference organization fall on? What side do the faithful fall on? What side do the unfaithful fall on? And when you consider this chart, ask yourself if the General Conference is the church that's going through and the one that appears to fall but does not. Anyways, guys, thanks for joining me. We'll see you in the next video. God bless you. See you soon.